California MHSA Basic eLearning module. Just a brief background on Access before we jump into the MHSA. Access California, a program of NorCal MHA, is a consumer-led stakeholder advocacy program funded by the California Mental Health Services Act and the Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission. NorCal MHA was founded in 1946 and is the oldest continuously operated consumer advocacy agency in California. NorCal MHA is a peer-run organization that specifically hires people with lived experience. So what is Access? Well, Access stands for Advancing Client and Community Empowerment Through Sustainable Solutions. Here's a quick video that sums up what we do here at Access.
If you live in California and are familiar with public mental health services, it's important that you get to know us. We're Access California, a program of NorCal MHA. We are the statewide consumer advocacy program funded by the Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission and Prop 63, the Mental Health Services Act. Whether you're an individual who is receiving services or has received services in the past, you work for an agency providing these services, or you are a county-run behavioral health system, we are here to support you. Access California stands for Advancing Client and Community Empowerment Through Sustainable Solutions, but you can call us Access for short. Empowerment through sustainable solutions? That's a big task. It requires research, understanding the current system and challenges, including policy and legislation. Outreach, raising awareness, and getting statewide buy-in at all levels of the system, and maintaining a statewide network of advocates. Advocacy, turning that awareness into action, being proactive and practical about what can be done differently, and challenging suboptimal practices. Education, mentoring and creating leaders, sharing knowledge about recovery, peer support, the stakeholder process, and best practices across the state by providing technical assistance for counties and providers. Although a big task, NorCal MHA has been a leader in consumer advocacy in California for over 70 years. Access California is ready for the challenge. Learn more about Access California or how to get involved on our website, www.accesscalifornia.org, or call our Ombudsman and Advocacy Helpline, 707-572-HELP. That is 707-572.
At Access, we value advocacy, recovery, and peer support. Now let's spend some time talking about what that means. In terms of advocacy, we are striving for meaningful stakeholder participation, active solicitation of community feedback, expanded opportunities for stakeholder involvement, and stakeholder inclusion at all levels, which includes policy development, program planning and implementation, and services delivery, oversight, and administration. With recovery, we're seeking infusion of recovery principles in all aspects of services delivery, which includes client voice and choice, individualized services, shared power and decision-making, and treatment always being voluntary. We advocate for recovery-based training and support for mental health professionals, as well as tracking, reporting, and analysis of recovery outcomes in all mental health programs. Finally, with peer support, Access advocates for fidelity to the evidence-based model, incorporation and expansion of peer support in all mental health programs, and living wages, ongoing professional development, and opportunities for advancement in peer support positions. Reflecting on those values we just discussed, the core of what Access does includes research, advocacy, education, and engagement. We also offer a stakeholder ombudsman and advocacy helpline. Stakeholders can report barriers to participation and perceived violations of the community program planning process, and Access will review the complaint, conduct research, and will initiate a resolution with the local or state mental health agency in question. Additionally, callers can receive help navigating our online, local, or statewide advocacy directories and assistance advocating for mental health needs on the local grassroots level. To reach the Stakeholder Ombudsman and Advocacy Helpline, call 707-572-4357. An easy way to remember this number is 707-572-HELP, HELP. As already mentioned, this e-learning module is focused on the basics of the Mental Health Services Act, or MHSA. This module will cover the origins of the MHSA, MHSA plans and updates, the 6 general standards of the MHSA, MHSA funding components, and the MHSA community program planning process. Let's get started. We will begin by covering a brief history of mental health milestones in California. In 1957, the Short-Doyle Act established the current community-based treatment structure of public mental health services and established local mental health advisory boards. The Lanterman-Petrus-Short Act of 1968 established due process rights of individuals facing involuntary commitment. In 1991, the Bronfman-Corkdale Act authorized the realignment that shifted mental health program and funding responsibilities from the state to counties. Not long after, in 1992, the Children's Mental Health Services Act outlined a coordinated, goal-directed system of mental health care for children and their families that emphasizes an interagency approach. In 1996, the Adult and Older Adult Mental Health Systems of Care Act outlined a recovery-oriented, outcomes-based mental health treatment approach for adults with serious mental disorders. And in 2004, the Mental Health Services Act was enacted to create funding to fill gaps in the adult and older adult and children's systems of care, as well as to establish local MHSA steering committees. The MHSA, also known as Prop 63, passed in November of 2004. In addition to establishing a 1% tax on income over $1 million, the MHSA expanded public mental health care and provided the opportunity to design new or adapt old mental health services. The MHSA also sought to transform the mental health system through the expansion of services and to improve the continuum and integration of care. So why was the MHSA needed? Voters recognized publicly funded mental health services were insufficient and inconsistent. Many Californians living with mental illnesses lacked access to the essential services and community supports necessary to recover and maintain their mental wellness. New and innovative methods of addressing mental illness had no reliable or sustainable funding source to be implemented. And counties are now receiving MHSA funding in an attempt to provide whatever it takes treatment for people with serious mental illnesses. The Welfare and Institutions Code and the California Code of Regulations house the laws and regulations relevant to the MHSA. The Welfare and Institutions Code details what the laws are, while the California Code of Regulations details how the laws will be implemented and enforced. The range of issues discussed in the Welfare and Institutions Code includes services relating to welfare, dependent children, mental health, handicapped, elderly, delinquency, foster care, Medi-Cal, food stamps, rehabilitation, and long-term care, just to name a few. While codified in 1937, its historical derivation can be traced to the 1800s. The code has been substantively and extensively amended since 1937. For example, the Elder Abuse and Dependent Adult Civil Protection Act is one of the areas in the code which, since 1982, has seen consistent and substantive amendments following the lead of constituents seeking to improve this area of the law. The California Code of Regulations is the official compilation and publication of the regulations adopted, amended, or repealed by state agencies pursuant to the Administrative Procedure Act, APA. Properly adopted regulations that have been filed with the Secretary of State have the force of law. MHSA plans and updates. This is a very general overview of the flow of MHSA funds. The California State Treasury collects the 1% tax on all income over $1 million and puts it in the Mental Health Services Fund. 5% of this fund is allocated to state agencies for administrative purposes. The remaining 95% is allocated to counties based on DHCS's allocation methodology. The following information comes directly from the Welfare and Institutions Code as cited at the bottom of the slide. Counties receiving MHSA funds must develop 3-year program and expenditure plans, projecting their MHSA revenues and identifying exactly how they intend to spend their MHSA funds over the next 3 years. Each 3-year plan shall be developed with local stakeholders, including adults and seniors with severe mental illness. Plans contain a programming component and a budgetary component. And all county MHSA spending shall be consistent with a 3-year plan. Before moving forward, let's discuss the importance of the word shall. In a legal context, the word shall is equivalent to words like will or must. So saying all county MHSA spending shall be consistent with the 3-year plan is no different than saying all county MHSA spending must be consistent with the 3-year plan. Now let's take a look at what is required of the MHSA 3-year plans. All 3-year plans shall include all of the following: a program for prevention and early intervention, a program for children's mental health services, a program for adult and older adult mental health services, an innovations program, a program for technical needs and capital facilities, identification of personnel shortages and training and education needs, establishment and maintenance of a prudent reserve, and certification that the county's plan complies with all MHSA statutes and regulations, including stakeholder participation and non-supplementation requirements. Now that we have reviewed what goes into a 3-year plan, let's discuss how plans become adopted. MHSA 3-year plans must go through a review process before becoming official. First, a plan is developed through the community planning process. Once it's developed, the draft is circulated during a 30-day public comment period. Then, the local mental health board holds a public hearing on the draft plan to provide recommendations and proposed revisions. The county then adopts a final plan, incorporating public comments and feedback. Once the County Board of Supervisors approves the final plan is sent to the MHSOAC and DHCS. Annual plan updates. Each year, counties are required to prepare annual updates to the MHSA 3-year program and expenditure plans. Annual updates must be developed through the CPP as well. Stakeholders must remain involved at all stages. These updates go through the same review and approval process as the original 3-year plans. Some other important things to keep in mind: MHSA funds cannot be used to supplant funding for existing county mental health programs. MHSA funds shall be kept in the local mental health services fund and shall be invested but should not be commingled with other county funds. Interest earned on the MHSA money held in the local mental health services fund shall be reinvested in county MHSA programs and expenditures in future years. Counties' MHSA funds shall revert back to the state if not spent within 3 years, with many exceptions. Next, we will be discussing the 6 general standards of the MHSA. Not just the initial program planning is subject to these standards. They also apply to updates, planning, implementation, and evaluation, and to the manner in which services are delivered and evaluated. According to the California Code of Regulations, the county shall adopt the MHSA general standards in planning, implementing, and evaluating the programs and/or services provided for the MHSA. The planning, implementation, and evaluation process includes, but is not limited to, the community program planning process, the development of the 3-year program and expenditure plans and updates, and the manner in which the county delivers services and evaluates the service delivery. Merriam-Webster defines standard as something set up and established by authority as a rule for the measure of quantity, weight, extent, value, or quality. We'll go into more details about each standard in the following slides, but for now, keep in mind that these 6 general standards should be reflected in all of the plans, as well as with the development of all of the plans. The 6 general standards for the MHSA are community collaboration, cultural competence, client-driven, family-driven, wellness, recovery, and resiliency, and integrated service experience. Our first general standard is community collaboration, or the process by which clients and/or families receiving services, other community members, agencies, organizations, and businesses work together to share information and resources in order to fulfill a shared vision and goals. With community collaboration, we are looking for meaningful stakeholder involvement. According to the Welfare and Institutions Code, counties shall demonstrate a partnership with constituents and stakeholders throughout the CPP that includes meaningful stakeholder involvement on mental health policy, program planning, implementation, monitoring, quality improvement, evaluation, and budget allocations. But what is the community program planning process? The Community Program Planning Process, or CPP, is the process to be used by the county to develop 3-year program and expenditure plans and updates in partnership with stakeholders to identify community issues related to mental illness resulting from lack of community services and supports, including any issues identified during the implementation of the Mental Health Services Act, to analyze the mental health needs in the community, and to identify and reevaluate priorities and strategies to meet those mental health needs. The California Code of Regulations tells us what that should look like. It says, to ensure that the community program planning process is adequately staffed, the county shall designate positions and/or units responsible for the overall community program planning process, coordination and management of the community program planning process, ensuring that stakeholders have the opportunity to participate in the community program planning process, which means stakeholder participation shall include representatives of underserved and/or unserved populations and family members of unserved and underserved populations. Additionally, the county shall designate positions responsible for ensuring that stakeholders that reflect the diversity of the demographics of the county, including but not limited to geographic location, age, gender, and race and ethnicity, have the opportunity to participate in the community program planning process, and outreach to clients with serious mental illness and/or serious emotional disturbances and their family members in order to ensure that the opportunity is there for the participation. What's that supposed to look like? The community program planning process shall, at a minimum, include involvement of clients with serious mental illnesses and/or serious emotional disturbances and their family members in all aspects of the community program planning process. The community program planning process shall, at a minimum, include training. Training shall be provided as needed to county staff designated responsible for any of the functions listed in 3300B that will enable staff to establish and sustain the community program planning process. Training shall be offered as needed to those stakeholders, clients, and when appropriate, the client's family who are participating in the community program planning process. Unfortunately, the actual community program planning process looks much different than what was laid out. In an Access survey, when asked what barriers impact your ability to fully participate in the CPP, 68% of participants noted lack of information about or promotion of CPP events. Of those, 45% or 31% of all respondents said lack of information prevented them from participating at all. 49% said inconvenient meeting times, and of those, 47% or 14% of all respondents said meeting times prevented them from participating at all, and 49% noted stigma. So what's wrong with this picture? The California Code of Regulations states that to ensure that the community program planning process is adequately staffed, the county shall designate positions and/or units responsible for ensuring that stakeholders that reflect the diversity of demographics of the county, including but not limited to geographic location, age, gender, and race and ethnicity, have the opportunity to participate in the community program planning process. And outreach to clients with serious mental illnesses and/or serious emotional disturbances and their families members to ensure the opportunity to participate. Furthermore, according to an Access annual client survey, 52% of respondents were unsure how frequently their local MHSA CPP committee meets, and 42% were unsure if their local mental health agency provides stakeholder training on the MHSA and CPP. 33% said their local mental health agency does not provide stakeholder trainings, and 25% said their local mental health agency does provide stakeholder trainings, but they could not recall when the last training occurred. So what's wrong here? This is a problem because the California Code of Regulations states that the community program planning process shall at a minimum include involvement of clients with serious mental illnesses and/or serious emotional disturbance and their family members in all aspects of the community program planning process, and participation of stakeholders as defined in section 3200.270. Training shall be provided as needed to county staff designated responsible for any of the functions listed in 3300B that will enable staff to establish and sustain a community program planning process. And training shall be offered as needed to those stakeholders, clients, and when appropriate, the client's family who are participating in the community program planning process. Of respondents from the Access survey, 36% said no trainings on the MHSA planning process are provided for stakeholders. 39% said stakeholder trainings are held as needed, with 11% saying quarterly, 6% saying twice a year, and 9% saying annually. 37% of respondents were unsure of how MHSA funding is used for stakeholder training or if it was used at all. So what's wrong here? Again, this is counter to what is stated in the California Code of Regulations, which says the community program planning process shall, at a minimum, include involvement of clients with serious mental illness and/or serious emotional disturbance and their family members in all aspects of the community program planning process. It should include participation of stakeholders, as stakeholders is defined in Section 3200.270. Training shall be provided as needed to county staff designated responsible for any of the functions listed in 3300B that will enable staff to establish and sustain a community program planning process. And training shall be offered as needed to those stakeholders, clients, and when appropriate, the client's family who are participating in the community program planning process. And then beginning with fiscal year 2006 and 2007, or in fiscal years when there are no funds dedicated to the community program planning process, the county may use up to 5% of its planning estimate, as calculated by the department for the fiscal year, for the community program planning process. According to the Access annual client survey, 28% of respondents said that changes, also known as updates, to MHSA funded plans and programs come before stakeholders for review and approval prior to finalization. 25% said changes are handled internally by the local mental health agency without stakeholder review, and 47% notes other, with 91% of those other responses saying that they were unsure. What's wrong here is that community program planning process, the county shall provide a community program planning process as the basis for developing the 3-year program plan and expenditure plans and updates. Just to illustrate this point with our survey results one more time, 45% of Access Annual County Provider Survey respondents said they were unsure how their local mental health agency ensures stakeholders remain actively involved in ongoing oversight of MHSA plans and programs. 37% said that changes to MHSA funded plans and programs go before a stakeholder committee prior to finalization, and 17% said that changes to the MHSA funded plans and programs are not subject to stakeholder review. So, what's wrong here? As we've already discussed, the California Code of Regulations states that the community program planning means a process to be used by the county to develop 3-year program and expenditure plans and updates in partnership with stakeholders to identify community issues related to mental illness resulting from lack of community services and supports, including any issues identified during the implementation of the Mental Health Services Act, to analyze the mental health needs for the community, and to identify and reevaluate priorities, strategies, and to meet those health needs. Take a moment to consider the following. How are client stakeholders currently being utilized in your county's community program planning process? Do clients and other stakeholders approve the plans, rubber stamp them, or are they involved in developing the plans? General standard number 2 is cultural competence. Culture is defined as integrated patterns of human behavior that include thoughts, communications, actions, customs, beliefs, values, and institutions of a racial, ethnic, religious, or social group. Cultural competence is a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, and policies that enable systems, agencies, or professionals, consumer providers, and family member providers to work effectively in cross-cultural situations. The regs state that cultural competence means incorporating and working to achieve each of 9 goals into all aspects of policymaking, program design, administration, and service delivery. Each system and program is assessed for the strengths and weaknesses of its proficiency to achieve these 9 specific goals. The infrastructure of a service, program, or system is transformed, and new protocol and procedures are developed as necessary to achieve these goals. The 9 goals that are being referenced here are as follows. Equal access to services of equal quality is provided without disparities among racial, ethnic, cultural, and linguistic populations or communities. Treatment interventions and outreach services effectively engage and retain individuals of diverse racial, ethnic, cultural, and linguistic populations. Disparities in services are identified and measured. Strategies and programs are developed and implemented, and adjustments are made to existing programs to eliminate these disparities. An understanding of the diverse belief systems concerning mental illness, health, healing, and wellness that exist among different racial, ethnic, cultural, and linguistic groups is incorporated into policy, program planning, and service delivery. An understanding of the impact historical bias, racism, and other forms of discrimination have upon each racial, ethnic, cultural, and linguistic population or community is incorporated into policy, program planning, and service delivery. An understanding of the impact bias, racism, and other forms of discrimination have on the mental health of each individual served is incorporated into service delivery. Services and supports utilize the strengths and forms of healing that are unique to an individual's racial, ethnic, cultural, and linguistic population or community. Staff, contractors, and other individuals who deliver services are trained to understand and effectively address these needs and values of the particular racial, ethnic, cultural, and/or linguistic population or community that they serve. And finally, strategies are developed and implemented to promote equal opportunities for administrators, service providers, and others involved in service delivery who share the diverse racial, ethnic, cultural, and linguistic characteristics of individuals with serious mental illnesses and emotional disturbances in the community. The third general standard is client-driven. Client-driven means that the client has the primary decision-making role in identifying their needs, preferences, and strengths, and a shared decision-making role in determining the services and supports that are most effective and helpful for them. Client-driven programs and services use clients' input as the main factor for planning, policies, procedures, service delivery, evaluation, and the definition and determination of outcomes. What do client-driven programs and services look like? Client-driven programs and services come from the inside out, are individualized, and rely on collaboration and partnership. This is different from clinically driven programs and services, which come from the outside in or top down, are formulated, and tend to rely on compliance and coercion. I'd like to also point out that when we say clinically driven, we are not referring to the medical model, but to programs and services that only measure clinical outcomes, such as medication compliance. General standard number 4 is family driven. What that means is families of children and youth with serious emotional disturbance have a primary decision-making role in the care of their own children, including the identification of needs, preferences, and strengths, and a shared decision-making role in determining the services and supports that would be most effective and helpful for their children. The 5th general standard is wellness, recovery, and resiliency. The Welfare and Institutions Code tells us that planning for services shall be consistent with the philosophy, principles, and practices of the recovery vision for mental health consumers, to promote concepts key to the recovery for individuals who have mental illness: hope, personal empowerment, respect, social connections, self-responsibility, and self-determination, to promote consumer-operated services as a way to support recovery. What is recovery? SAMHSA's 2012 working definition of recovery reads, a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. Now let's break that down a bit. A process of change. It's a journey, not just a destination. Improve health and wellness. It's about more than mental illness. Self-directed life. People diagnosed with mental illness are capable of taking care of themselves and taking control of their lives. Strive and reach their full potential. People with mental illness get better and move on. They aren't always sick, and they won't always experience a relapse. They don't stay fragile forever. At this point, you might be wondering who or what is SAMHSA. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, is the agency within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services that leads public health efforts to advance the behavioral health of the nation. SAMHSA's mission is to reduce the impact of substance abuse and mental illness on America's communities. Congress established SAMHSA in 1992 to make substance use and mental health disorder information, services, and research more accessible. It is SAMHSA's mission to reduce the impact of substance abuse and mental illness on America. Let's review some key concepts of the recovery model. Recovery is subjective. It is driven by people's personal lived experiences of mental health challenges and wellness. A diagnosis is not always permanent. Care is person-focused. Outcomes include empowerment, hope, self-advocacy, choice, self-identified goals, healing, well-being, and control of symptoms. Here is a brief video on recovery orientation.
What does the recovery model look like today?
The recovery model has grown a great deal over the last 2 decades. It began as an outsider movement, began with the consumer movement, and has moved on to now be very mainstream. There's a President's Commission about the recovery movement. There's a Mental Health Services Act in California here funding the recovery movement. There's a number of states doing recovery movements, SAMHSA, the VA, moving along. And at this point, although it's a very scattered around the system, it is every bit as sophisticated as a standard system of care. It includes the experiences people have in recovery. It includes the relationships between the providers and the people who are receiving care. It includes who's doing the providing of care and where they're doing it, what the system looks like and what the funding looks like, what the values behind it are like. At this point, recovery is not just a set of slogans and values. It is now a very sophisticated program for how to help people with things. There's a number of people who say they're doing recovery. They put a sign on the wall and say, we're a recovery program now, and do the same thing. They say, that's not different. That isn't recovery. So I think you should look for 3 things when you're looking for, is this really recovery, is this really different? And the three things are, one is this person-centered instead of illness-centered? Do all of the services still have to do with treating your illness, making sure you have medication, making sure you have a diagnosis, making sure you're complying with treatment, or do the services have to do with helping you rebuild a better life? Is all of you included there? Your strengths and your weaknesses, your hopes, dreams, your goals? Is things included about where you're going to live, where you're going to work, who you're going to be friends, who's going to be family, what about spirituality? Or is it all just focused on the illness? Recovery programs are not just about treating an illness, they're about helping a person rebuild their whole life. Second thing to look for that's different in these programs is recovery programs move from being professionally driven to being client driven. Standard medical care, I went to medical school for a very long time, I'm very experienced, I'll give you the benefit of my experience, I'll tell you what to do and you follow my directions and I'll check your compliance and see if your life gets better as a result. Recovery says none of us are obedient enough to do that for more than about 2 weeks. So if you're actually going to progress in recovery with a long-term serious mental illness that's affected your whole life, you're going to have to take a strong role in what's happening in your own recovery and your own treatment. Your goals are going to have to drive the process. We're going to have to do some shared decision making. We're going to have to do some collaboration. Sometimes I'll be following along doing things with you I don't exactly agree with, and sometimes you'll be following along with me doing things you don't exactly agree with. It's more a partnership and a collaboration, which is real different than the standard medical model. The third thing to look for in a recovery system that's different is it really strengths-based instead of deficits-based? Do you spend all your time talking about what's wrong, what kind of symptoms, what kind of barriers, what kind of things in the way, and let's fix all of your problems and get to help by fixing problems? Or do we say, what's right about you? What are your strengths? Do you bring a strong self-esteem, a big work ethic, a belief in yourself, a good family, a spiritual background, some money along, a good place to live? What do you bring along? Because recovery is not cure. Almost all of these illnesses people have, they cannot be cured. The next psychosis is coming, the next manic episode, the next drug relapse, the next rape flashback. And the question isn't, can we make that never happen to you? The question is, can we make it so when it does happen, you're ready for it, it doesn't ruin your life. You stay held together, you don't end up in a hospital, you keep your job, you keep your family, you keep your kids, you keep your relationship, even when those things happen. Did we build the strength in you to handle your life, rather than you relied on me to fix all the wrong things with you? Those three things taken together, is it really person-centered instead of illness-centered? Is it really collaborative and client-driven instead of professional-driven? And is it really strengths-based and resiliency-driven rather than deficit-based? You should find in any true recovery program, and that's what distinguishes.
The final general standard is integrated service experience. The codes and regs explain that as the client, and when appropriate, the client's family accesses a full range of services provided by multiple agencies, programs, and funding sources in a comprehensive and coordinated manner, provides seamless services, delivers and coordinates services through a single agency or system of care. It includes multi-agency programs and joint planning, and focuses on self-sufficiency for adults and safe family living for children and youth. One example of this is federally qualified health centers, FQHCs. Next, we will be discussing funding components of the MHSA. If you are already familiar with the MHSA, you may have heard of the 5 MHSA components: prevention and early intervention, community services and supports, innovative programs, workforce education and training, and capital facilities and technology. However, there are actually 7 components, the other 2 being prudent reserve and community planning process. We'll start by reviewing local MHSA funding. Our first component is prevention and early intervention, or PEI. These are services and programs designed to prevent mental illness from occurring or from becoming more severe and disabling. Programs and services can be universal, meaning they target the general public or a whole population group that has not been identified on the basis of individual risk. Or it can be selective, meaning that they target individuals or a subgroup whose risk of developing mental illness is significantly higher than average. Basically, PEI addresses a condition early, is of relatively low intensity and relatively short duration, and it supports well-being in major life domains, avoiding the need for more extensive mental health services. Now let's review what the codes and regs say about PEI funding. PEI should be at least 20% of MHSA funds. So 20% of MHSA funds distributed to the counties shall be used for prevention and early intervention programs. The expenditure for prevention and early intervention may be increased in any county in which the department determines that the increase will decrease the need and cost for additional services to severely mental ill persons. For example, if it will save money later on. And at least 51% of PEI funds shall be spent on individuals aged 25 and younger. So these are children, youth, and transitional aged youth, or TAY. So what is PEI for? PEI funds programs and services to prevent mental illness from becoming severe and disabling. PEI strategies are aimed at reducing suicide, incarcerations, school failure or dropout, unemployment, prolonged suffering, homelessness, and removal of children from their homes. Now, let's shift our focus to Community Services and Supports, or CSS. Community Services and Supports are programs, services, and strategies identified by each county through its stakeholder process to serve underserved and unserved populations, with an emphasis on eliminating disparity in access and improving mental health outcomes for racial and ethnic populations. There are a few components of CSS. Full Service Partnership, which are funds to provide whatever it takes for initial populations. General Systems Development, which are funds to improve programs, services, and supports for the identified initial full service populations and for other clients consistent with the target populations. And Outreach and Engagement. These are funds for outreach and engagement of those populations that are currently receiving too little or no service. CSS is the largest component of MHSA funds. Although 80% or 76 cents of every dollar is allocated to CSS, 75% is the maximum amount a county can spend due to the 5% INN mandate. As we already touched on, full service partnerships, or FSPs, are included in CSS and provide wraparound service or whatever it takes services to consumers. Housing is also included in this category. Community Services and Supports means a component of the 3-year program and expenditure plans that refers to service delivery systems for mental health services and supports for children and youth, transition age youth, adults, and older adults. These services and supports are similar to those found in Welfare Institutions Code Sections 5800 and Sequitur. Programs and services funded through CSS shall incorporate all of the following: the MHSA General Standards, peer support and family education support, and wraparound program for children's services. The MHSA does mandate that counties utilize peer support services in their CSS programs. The codes and regs read that the county shall establish peer support and family education support services or expand these services to meet the needs and preferences of the clients and or family members. The county shall conduct outreach to provide equal opportunities for peers who share the diverse racial, ethnic, cultural, and linguistic characteristics of the individuals and clients served. Next, we will cover innovative, or INN, programs. 5% of MHSA funds must be utilized for innovative programs. Innovative programs are projects that the county designs and implements for a defined time period and evaluates to develop new best practices in mental health services and supports. The MHSOAC is responsible for reviewing, approving, or rejecting and evaluating counties' INN programs. INN plans must do at least one of the following: introduce a new mental health practice or approach, make a change to an existing mental health practice or approach, such as adaptation for a new setting or community, or introduce to the mental health system a promising community-driven practice or approach that has been successful in non-mental health contexts or settings, or participate in a housing program designed to stabilize a person's living situation while also providing supportive services on site. So, what makes a plan innovative? Again, INN plans must utilize at least one of the following innovative approaches. It must introduce a new mental health practice or approach, make a change to an existing mental health practice or approach, introduce to the mental health system a promising community-driven practice or approach that has been successful in non-mental health contexts or settings, or participate in a supportive housing program with services on site. INN plans can be designed to improve any of the following practices, approaches, or problems: administrative, governance, and organizational practices, processes, or procedures; advocacy; education and training for service providers, including non-traditional mental health practitioners; outreach, capacity building, and community development; system development; public education efforts; research; services and interventions, including prevention, early intervention, and treatment; and permanent supportive housing development. There are a few other MHSA expenditures we will be covering: capital facilities and technological needs, workforce education and training needs, and prudent reserve. For these additional expenditures, the Welfare and Institution Codes reads that county MHSA programs for services may include funds for technological needs and capital facilities, human resource needs, and a prudent reserve to ensure services do not have to be significantly reduced in years in which revenues are below the average of previous years. The total allocation shall not exceed 20% of the average amount of funds allocated to that county for the previous 5 fiscal years. Let's go over an example. County A's annual MHSA revenues are as follows: Year 1, $110 million. Year 2, $127 million. Year 3, $126 million. Year 4, $133 million. Year 5, $129 million. And Year 6, $140 million. Based on that information, according to the MHSA, what is the maximum amount County A may allocate to the CFTN, WET, and Prudent Reserve combined in Year 6? The answer is D, $25 million. Here's how we get that number. Year 1 plus Year 2 plus Year 3 plus Year 4 plus Year 5 equals $625 million. Divided by 5 years equals $125 million. The average times 20% is $25 million. Workforce Education and Training, or WET, funds support human resource needs. WET funds can be used to educate the public mental health system workforce on incorporating the MHSA's general standards into its work. It can also increase the number of clients and family members of clients employed in the public mental health system through activities such as recruitment, supportive employment services, creating and implementing promotional opportunities, creating and implementing policies that promote job retention. Additionally, WET funds can be used to conduct focused outreach and recruitment to provide equal employment opportunities in the public mental health system for individuals who share the racial, ethnic, cultural, and/or linguistic characteristics of clients and family members, to recruit, employ, and support the employment of individuals in the public mental health system who are culturally and linguistically competent, and to incorporate the input of clients and family members of clients, and, whenever possible, utilize them as trainers and consultants in public mental health WET programs and/or activities. One example of a WET program is NorCal MHA's WISE program. WISE stands for Workforce Integration Support and Education. WISE is a program of NorCal MHA administered by the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development, OSHPD, and funded by the California Mental Health Services Act as a component of OSHPD's statewide WET plan. WISE focuses on genuine workforce integration through the transformation of organizational culture. According to the statewide auditor's report, DHCS has not developed adequate guidelines to ensure counties are timely spending down their MHSA funds and accrued interest, and has not created a methodology to revert counties' unspent MHSA funds back to the state, resulting in three major problems: accumulation of unspent MHSA funds subject to reversion, accumulation of unspent interest earned on MHSA funds, and accumulation of excessive MHSA prudent reserves. You can find a summary of this report attached to this training. If you'd like to view the full report, you can find it by following the address at the bottom of this slide. Here we have some more information from the state audit report. Unspent MHSA funds. Counties amassed unspent funds of $231 million, not including reserves, as of the end of fiscal year 2015-2016, that they should have reverted to the state for reallocation to other local mental health agencies. Unspent MHSA interest. Counties have accumulated a total of $81 million in unspent MHSA interest through fiscal year 2015-2016. Excessive MHSA reserves. Counties held between $157 million and $274 million in excessive MHSA reserves as of the end of fiscal year 2015-2016. There are some new limits on prudent reserve as of 2019. The county shall calculate an amount it establishes as a prudent reserve for its local mental health services fund, not to exceed 33% of the average community services and support revenue received for the fund in the preceding 5 years. The county shall reassess the maximum amount of this reserve every 5 years and certify the reassessment as part of the 3-year program and expenditure plan. To put that another way, 20% of the average of all county MHSA funds in the past 5 fiscal years were allocated to capital facilities, WET and prudent reserve combined. But up to 33% of the average of all CSS funds in the past fiscal years can be held for prudent reserve only. Let's work through another example. Assuming County A allocates 20% of PEI each year, the revenue is as follows. Year 1, $120 million with CSS at $88 million. Year 2, $127 million with CSS as $101.6 million. Year 3, $126 million with CSS at $100.8 million. Year 4, $133 million with CSS at $106.4 million. Year 5, $129 million with CSS at $103.2 million. And Year 6, $140 million with CSS at $112 million. Based on the funds from the last slide, according to the MHSA, what is the maximum amount County A may hold in its prudent reserve in Year 6, rounded to the nearest millionth? A, $100 million, B, $33 million, C, $35 million, or D, $37 million? The answer is B, $33 million. Year 1 CSS plus Year 2 CSS plus Year 3 CSS plus Year 4 CSS plus Year 5 CSS equals $500 million. Divided by 5 years equals $100 million, which is the average. Multiplied by 33% is $33 million. Now, let's assume at the beginning of Year 6, County A is holding $30 million in its prudent reserve. Assume County A wants to allocate the full 20% to CFTN Wet and Prudent Reserve in year 6. What's the minimum amount County A may allocate to CFTN and Wet combined in year 6? Is it A, 25 million, B, 33 million, C, 22 million, or D, $30 million? The answer is C, $22 million. 20% is $25 million. Only $3 million may be allocated to prudent reserve because the max a county can hold in year 6 is $33 million. So $25 million minus $3 million equals $22 million left over for CF, TN, and WET. We will wrap up this training by reviewing Community Program Planning, or CPP. According to the codes and regs, the county MHSA allocations shall include funding for annual planning costs. The total of these costs shall not exceed 5% of the total annual revenues received through the county MHSA fund. The planning costs shall include funds for county mental health programs to pay for the cost of consumers, family members, and other stakeholders to participate in the planning process. Here, we have some funding examples of the community planning process. The above figures were gathered from the MHSOAC Fiscal Transparency Tool. Keeping in mind that counties can allocate up to 5% of MHSA funds to CPP, here's how that would look for a small, a medium, and a large county. A county such as Alpine, which is small, could have 1,439,433, with 5% local planning being 71,971. Please note the differences between Kern, a medium-sized county, and Los Angeles, a large-sized county. By using the MHSOAC Online Fiscal Transparency Tool, we are able to see what counties have reported spending on CPP. On the left, you will see the average amount spent. These averages are misleading. That is because, as you can see on the right, most counties are not spending any money on CPP, $0. Just to sum up, today we reviewed the following topics regarding the Mental Health Services Act: MHSA Origins, MHSA Plans and Updates, MHSA General Standards, MHSA Funding Components, and MHSA Community Program Planning Process. Thank you for attending this presentation. Please reach out to us anytime over the web, by email, phone, or social media.